Our top stories at this hour. The European Union warns that Russia isn't interested in peace in Ukraine as US President Donald Trump prepares for talks with the Russian leader Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin has confirmed that the discussions will take place on Tuesday about ending the war in Ukraine. We have analysis. As Rwanda expels all Belgian diplomats in a diplomatic worsening of relations linked to the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the M23 rebels they back say they'll talk to the DRC government. And the Houthis in Yemen say they've been fresh US airstrikes targeting them in different parts of the country. The rebels claim to have twice attacked an American aircraft carrier, calling it retaliation for deadly US strikes. Plus, fresh tornado warnings have been issued for the US states of Virginia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. The severe storms that have battered the Midwest and South, killing at least 37 people, are expected to sweep across the East Coast. First, tonight, the Kremlin has confirmed that Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump will talk tomorrow about ending the war in Ukraine. The Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, wouldn't say exactly what the two presidents would discuss. On Sunday, President Trump suggested that land and power plants were now part of the conversation. Mr. Trump said a lot of work had been going on over the weekend, referring to efforts to end the war between Ukraine and Russia. The EU says that conditions demanded by Russia for any ceasefire in Ukraine show that Moscow doesn't really want peace. The EU foreign policy chief suggested that the conditions being presented by Moscow amounted to all of Russia's ultimate goals that they had wanted to achieve from the war.
Pretty well, I think, with Russia. We'll see if we have something to announce maybe by Tuesday. I'll be speaking to President Putin on Tuesday. And a lot of work's been done over the weekend. We want to see if we can bring that war to an end. Maybe we can, maybe we can't, but I think we have a very good chance. I think we'll, be talking about land. It's a lot of land. It's a lot different than it was before the wars, And we'll be talking about land. We'll be talking about power plants. That's up, that's a big question. But I think we have a lot of it already discussed very much by both sides.
You'll ask him.
Ukraine and Russia.
You'll ask him.
We're already talking about that, dividing up certain assets. Yeah, and they've been working on that.
Donald Trump. Well, for his assessment, I'm joined now on the line from London by the international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Good to see you, Dr. Laskiewicz. Are we any the wiser about this conversation between Trump and Putin tomorrow? Because it's being portrayed that this is a discussion not designed to sign off any deal, but to maintain momentum and US pressure on the Russian side.
Well, there's a contradiction between this and what Donald Trump is saying. Donald Trump has just been saying about dividing up, presumably, Ukrainian territory. The notion of power plants is enigmatic. They're not that important, but for some reason he's mentioned them. But dividing up assets means that they are going ahead, these talks, on the basis of, as Ukrainian seizing land and doing so under pressure from America. The point about America saying pressurizing Russia is for it to come to any sort of demands that America can meet. Apart from that, there is no evidence that Donald Trump is especially pressurizing Russia in any way. He has, of course, put the Russians on the orange list about countries he doesn't want their citizens to visit US particularly, but that's minor. The key point here is precisely what he has in mind, but it does not look very good. However, it is important to clarify one thing immediately. The EU rulers say that Russian demands are tantamount to what they wanted from this war. This is not true. Russia wanted to conquer the whole of Ukraine, failed to do so in the opening days, and these set of demands it has now are its secondary demands, the ones that it formulated in the period when it was quite clear it was unable to conquer Ukraine in one go.
Well, I mean, just to be clear, do you agree with the EU when it says that conditions demanded by Russia for any ceasefire in Ukraine show that Moscow doesn't really want peace?
No, I wouldn't, for a very simple reason. They're not stating they want the whole of Ukraine. The conditions they set out are the conditions they've been held for 3 years, the conditions which, in fact, Russia has been hinting at even before the war. So there's nothing new about them. The problem is that in EU terms, and in the terms of how America was run before, and of course Ukraine, this is a huge defeat. It is where Russia has succeeded in getting some of its ambitions realized, admittedly not all of them, by not conquering the whole of Ukraine, but certainly its secondary ones. The real problem is, when about Russia wanting peace is, does Russia really want peace in the long run? It seems most unlikely, and that therefore in that respect, this war is not going to be an end war. The question is, can we arrive at some sort of ceasefire for at least a few years? That would appear to be possible. But the point is that Russia wants its interests maintained. It is winning at present. It has the force to do so. Europe is simply a secondary player in all this, and therefore it is possible to arrive at a peace with Russia, but at a cost. Moreover, there is a final aspect to this. It is possible that Russia may well be setting up a negotiating table, that perhaps some of its demands might be softened. However, there is no evidence of that at present, nor would we expect any, because the key discussion now is going to be between Putin and Trump. So therefore, in a nutshell, it is not true that Russia does not seek peace at all. It's more accurate to say it seeks peace on its own terms, or at least to the degree that it can agree with these such terms.
Well, that seems to actually gel with a lot of what the EU is saying, because they seem to think that the conditions being presented by Moscow amounted in fact to all of Russia's ultimate goals that they wanted to achieve from the war. I mean, that's pretty much what you're saying, really, isn't it?
Secondary goals, not primary. The primary goal was the conquest of Ukraine. This failed in the opening stages of the war. But the secondary goals, yes, if the terms were adhered to that the Russians are putting forward, it would indeed be the realization of their secondary goals. However, it is stated, this may be to some degree a negotiating position, so there may be some softening. Moreover, Russia would be prepared to sign of those, so that part of the statement which says that Russia is not interested in peace, it is interested in peace on its terms. Well, if you're going to be very a bit cold-headed about it, Ukraine also wants peace on its terms. I mean, that is the whole problem. That is why there is a war. That is why negotiations are so difficult. What the EU seems to think is only its terms, that is to say Ukraine's and Europe's, count, and anything that Russia wants or does not want is wrong, heinous, should be disregarded. But unfortunately, in the real world, in the real politik, to use a German term, Russia's views must also be taken into account.
Mr. Trump, though, seems determinedly positive. I mean, he's expressed optimism about the prospects that a ceasefire deal could be finalized. But as far as we know, the Russians, as you correctly pointed out, are still sticking hard to their guns, reiterating very clearly that as part of any deal, they want Ukraine to be utterly neutral and completely outside the NATO military alliance. And of course, neutrality is something the Ukrainians have made very clear that they are not going to accept. So there is clearly still a tension and a disagreement at the moment.
Yes, but we must now put your question into two parts. Yes, Ukraine and Europe want peace on their terms, which is that all Russians must leave Ukrainian soil, and that's about the least they want. And therefore, yes, whatever is suggested between Russia and America will more than likely be rejected out of hand by the president of Ukraine with the EU support. That, however, does not mean that talks between Russia and America won't go ahead. It doesn't even mean that President Trump agrees with anything that EU and Ukraine are stating. And in this sense, what we have is something else altogether. Notice one of his comments that there's been a great deal of work done recently. Now, as I've said previously and repeat, it's the silent areas we have to look out for. It's the areas which don't talk about, the quiet talks. Those are the key ones. They've been going on. So already there is some notion of what the deal is in President Trump's and President Putin's head, because there's already been groundwork prepared for it. In that sense, this conversation bodes to be, if you like, the icing on the cake, simply the culmination of these secret talks which have been going on. That Ukraine might not accept them actually doesn't mean to say that America won't profit from that. First of all, it will have a good excuse not to support Ukraine. Secondly, it all depends what Russia and America are talking about in other areas. We mentioned on Ukraine, but please remember, President Trump has got Greenland, Canada, Panama in his sights. He's got the Houthis and Gaza and Iran on his menu. And it's quite possible that may be included in these talks, in which case they'll be very important indeed. And Ukraine, in this respect, may be only a minor part of his interests. What I'm stating, therefore, is that here we are discussing what Ukraine wants, whereas actually the key point is, what does Trump really want from this?
Indeed. So just to be clear, the Americans want a fast, quick ceasefire and then talk about the difficult, stuff sort of long term. And the Russians are saying, no, we need to talk about all the difficult stuff in the round.
Yes, there is a difference here between what the Russians and the Americans want, but it's not impossible to bridge. The Americans want a ceasefire, but assuming that Ukraine accepts the terms of the ceasefire. And here is the problem. It is more than likely that Ukraine will not, with EU support, accept them, whereupon America's goal of a ceasefire will be therefore not be able to be met, and will give President Trump a free hand to, do what he wants in other parts of the world, to perhaps go closer to Putin. There is no, if you like, the two are not mutually exclusive, because it does not follow that because he wants a ceasefire, the rest of the sentence should read, he wants a ceasefire that is on terms that both sides agree to and that he likes. The moment Ukraine were to say it doesn't like it, then that ceasefire goal, in America's terms, will no longer be primary.
So the Russians and the Americans are still some way apart, and it'll take concessions by both sides to get them closer. I mean, I know it sounds like I'm making you repeat yourself, but we just like to hear you talk.
Very nice, thank you. The important point here to realize is that America, now being America first, with its own interests, is no longer the clear ally of Ukraine, the staunch ally. All that is gone. The question is, what is an American interest? What does Donald Trump really go for? He wants a ceasefire. He has in his head an agreement which he thinks Ukraine should agree to. And if it doesn't agree to them, he could walk away from the mess. Now, there is indeed a difference in Ukrainian and Russian views, But the key point is, what is the difference between Russian and American views? That is the key point. Because if that can be bridged, then what Ukraine and the EU want and don't want will be suddenly of secondary interest. Here is the key question. We are now today somewhat in the dark, but it's almost clear it will involve some sort of de facto partition of Ukraine, in which a great deal of territory is ceded to Russia. That would appear to be now almost beyond question. And that being the case, there is a way by which Russia and America can come to an agreement of what a ceasefire might look like. But Ukraine, of course, won't like any of this and will reject it.
Dr. Laskiewicz, I want to thank you for the clarity of your words and the accuracy of your analysis. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is the international affairs analyst. He was talking to me on the line there from London. You're watching The World. Plenty more to come. Stay with us.